Would you like to add animations to your Android app? Are you trying to make this work without the help of a designer or Adobe tools? If so, this video is for you. Since we released the material design course at Udacity, vector drawables have become more of an integral design tool in applications. Back in 2015, vector drawables were only supported on the most recent devices running API level 21 or higher, hardly a majority of the market. It would be another year until Vector Drawable and Animated Vector Drawable reached the support library. That allowed developers targeting API level 7 or higher to use Vector Drawable and API 11 or higher to use Animated Vector Drawable. In the years since, outside the core Android framework, there are also analogs like Lottie that allow you to animate things in your app. In the current Udacity Android app, the few moments of instructive motion are Lottie JSON files. Now, let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with using assets someone's released on lottiefiles.com. However, extra care has to be taken when you use assets from multiple creators to make sure they both feel cohesive to each other and they work in the context of your app. I reviewed the animations we're using in the Android app, and some of them definitely could be done with open source tools like ShapeShifter and Blender. Throughout this series, I'm going to take you through designing an animated vector drawable and how to animate it. So here's the animation that I'm going to recreate using ShapeShifter. In the current app, it shows whenever there's an unknown error. So you might be thinking the first step would be to fire up a program and start, just experimenting and doing things. Our first step is to take the animation in and deconstruct it. The first thing I can see about this animation is that it's mostly circles. It's also symmetrical. So if the tool I use can duplicate things, I might be able to only rig half of the animation and then copy it. So now I know what I'm going to create or draw. Let's figure out the when, specifically when on the timeline each thing is happening, because a lot of things are happening here with eyes blinking and then going to X's. So I scribbled a quick storyboard of what's going on, and let's get started. ShapeShifter is an icon animation tool by Alex Lockwood that allows you to create animations for mobile, both iOS and Android, and the web. It exports to SVG, scalable vector graphics, SVG sprite sheets, and CSS keyframe animations. In addition to his GitHub, you should also check out Alex's website, Android Design Patterns, and specifically the post on icon animation techniques. I'll be throwing up a link somewhere on screen and in the description. I'll be working off a beta version of ShapeShifter located at beta.shapeshifter.design. The mainline version might look slightly different depending on when you're viewing this. When you open up ShapeShifter, you're greeted by a toolbar to the left, an empty canvas, a menu, and a timeline to the bottom. The toolbar has options for selecting an object, rotating an object, transforming it, the pencil tool, the vector tool, oval, or pretty much a circle, rectangle, and zoom. Now let's talk about these drawing tools really quickly. The pencil tool allows you to freehand a shape like so, and it attempts to do a fill. The vector tool allows you to pick specific points to make a shape. The oval tool, like you probably assume, you can draw ovals and circles and ellipses, and the same with the rectangle tool. Let's clear those out. On the bottom of the window, we have, like I said before, the timeline, and we have menu options here to open ShapeShifter files or view a demo. Let we can see the timeline more fully filled in with animating rotation and path data. We have an import menu where we can import a SVG or a vector drawable, and then we can also export the options that we talked about before. So for our unknown error animation, let's start with the assets that won't animate. So we're going to draw and use the oval tool to roughly draw a circle that looks about right. And our original had a yellowish fill color, so let's fill in that. I'd like there not to be a border around this object, so I'm going to turn the stroke to 0. And we can rename that as face. It's not required, but you know, it's good to be thinking about what stuff should be. Okay, so let's draw the mouth of this object. And we could use the vector tool, but I'll just use the rectangle because it's going to be a bit faster. And I would like that color to be black. So let's make it 0, 0, 0. And like for the other one, we're going to clear the stroke. And we can call that mouth. So to draw our eye, we're going to need to use the oval tool again. Before we get to that, let's create a new group layer. And this was part of the UI that I didn't explain yet. What a group layer allows us to do is to apply a rotation, scale, or translation on a set of paths that are grouped under it. So let's now make our eye shape. That looks about right. Make that black. And looks like we have a stroke on that. Let's see. Let's make it black. So, all right, and let's we can leave that name the same, but it's not in the path yet. So it's not in the group yet, rather. So let's move it up until it shows in the group. And now if we do a translation, it's going to apply to that path. Now that we have the circle in the group, let's animate the blink. We can do that by clicking the stopwatch icon right here and clicking scaleX. Now that's going to scale it along the x-axis. And right now it's defaulting to 0.1 seconds or 100 milliseconds for that transition. Now you can play around and find just through trial and error, try and figure out what's a good value to move it to. One thing that we'll notice when we scrub through this animation is that it's physically moving the eye up. We don't want that. So the one way that we can solve that is figure out a pivot point that it's going to do its scale around. And this is about 8, 9. And now when we do it, when we scrub through, it is staying in the same place, but we can see that it's animating correctly. And just for now, let's rename that group left eye. And we can hide it. Yeah. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to create the set of X eyes. One way that you can do this is to use the rectangle tool. You can also use let me turn off some of these layers so that they don't interfere. You can also use the vector tool, so you can do something like this and this. Kind of freehanding this. This isn't working as well as I thought it would, but we'll see. So yeah, you can move all these points around individually to give you the shape that you need, and that looks good enough. And let's close this guy. Okay. Slightly crooked F, but crooked X, but it will work. Now let's create a group, and we are going to move that path into that group. And let's show our eye, and let's scale down the X to roughly the same size as the eye. Okay, there we go. Looks about right. And I'm going to name that group X left eye. Okay. All right. And I might, oh yeah, I need to make the color of that black, make the stroke color of that black, turn off the eye to see it a little bit better, and I might do not that much, do like a 0.5 stroke width, yeah, to make it look a little bit chunkier. Yep, that works. Okay, so we have our first animation of our eye where it is moving from 1 down to 0.3 over a 100 milliseconds. Let's implement more of the blink. So that's closing. Let's have another one that's opening, and we want it to go from to 0.25, and then we're just reversing it 0.25 to 1. So when we loop, it gives you a single blink. So after the second blink, we want this X left eye to show up. So let's make another animation, and this time we need to do it directly on the path because fill alpha exists on the individual path and not on the group. We want to go from 1 to 0, and the reason why this is showing up is because I have a stroke on it. So let's turn that stroke off, and then it's going to blink and then fade. Now let's make this animation a bit longer so we have a bit more space. Alright. Now if I remember correctly, the original animation had 2 blinks, and this is 1 blink cycle right here. So let's make another quick one by placing our cursor and scaleX, and it's at 1. And let's, since it's going down to fade out, let's make it smaller than that 0.25. Let's make it like 0.1. And then also at the same time sort of overlap. Yeah, that looks good. So we're overlapping our fill alpha to have it going down to nothing. And then if we go into our left eye X path, what we want to do is animate this fill alpha and the stroke alpha. We want to animate those from 0 to 1. Now some of this is just a matter of trial and error of seeing what looks the best. So like one thing that I might want to do is have the actual size of the stroke animate. That looks good enough. One thing that we can't do yet in ShapeShifter is you can't Control V to copy and paste things. So actually what we're going to need to do is sort of create our groups again and just copy and paste the information over. So so I'm gonna do that really quickly, and I will see you on the next side. Now we have a animation that roughly recreates the original one that we saw earlier, and I need it to export this as a animated vector drawable. I changed that to unknown error animation. And weird. Okay. So this was 24 by 24. So we should probably make that a bit bigger. So another thing that we could do is if we go back to our browser and go to the vector layer, we can see that our width and height were set to 24. If we made these 200 by 200 and perhaps make a new group layer, move it all the way to the top and put everything in this group. Okay, so we put everything in that group, and okay, now let's re-export it. There is a weird artifact that I'm not sure why it's there, but as you can see, in roughly 30 minutes or so, I was able to reasonably recreate a Lottie animation in ShapeShifter. That's not to say that there are things that don't need to be tweaked, but as we can see, there are some limits to using a tool such as this. It's great for quick and dirty, and when you pair this with design tools that make up for these shortcomings, you find yourself with a very capable design flow without having to pay $240 a year or bugging a designer or someone to share a license. The next post is going to pull some of this workflow out of ShapeShifter to make it a little bit more awesome. Thanks for watching and keep learning.